Switchbot have done it. This is the robot cleaner that I've been waiting for, and it's almost perfect. To call it a cleaner though would probably do it a disservice, because this is the first robot cleaner I've taken a look at that has utility beyond vacuuming and mopping. It's one step away from bringing me a cup of tea in the morning, but I'll tell you more about that later in the episode, which you'll need to probably put your slippers on and pour a glass of whisky for, because it's a meaty episode indeed. Now, I originally saw this back at IFA 23, and it caught my eye immediately for its Switchbot signature innovation, something which they seem to be doing a lot of this year. For starters, the design is quite different to other robot cleaners I've tested before. On the surface, it looks the same, with its round body and front sensors and LiDAR scanner on the top for advanced mapping. But the first surprise came when I used it at night the first time, when it stalked around the corner, revealing that it had beams of light as big headlamps, like a member of a SWAT team raiding my home.
Alpha team, this is Echo team. Bravo 1 is clear. Copy that, Echo. Proceed with caution.
It was a little bit freaky the first time actually, but aside from that, underneath its form factor becomes quite a different story. The main vacuum brush has been replaced with an anti-tangle rubber sweeper, which I've got to say has done wonders in my usage case. I have a dog with extremely long hair, and with other vacuums that use like a brush system, I have to regularly detangle it, but so far, after several weeks of use, I haven't had to detangle it even once, so fingers crossed that continues. Now, interestingly, although only a small difference here, they've only included one front side brush, which I'm not a huge fan of in a cleaner of this size. It would have been nice to have had two either side, which I think is better for sweeping and vacuuming, makes it more efficient. It's not the end of the world, but it still manages to get the corners by going around the outside of the room first to sweep everything from the edges to the centre before proceeding with the middle of the room. Now, the real difference is not the vacuuming section. The real difference, in my opinion, is the mopping system, which I'm a particular fan of. Instead of the rather terrible wet wipe design that cheaper vacuums have, or even the rotating mop pads like others such as the EcoVac series has, this has a mopping roller, not too dissimilar to a paint roller you'd find at your DIY shop. Now, this spins around quickly on its axis, rotating to buff the floor clean. It can auto-raise as well off the ground when it detects carpet or rugs, which means that the S10 is capable of cleaning both hard and soft floors in the same cycle. And so far it's done a fantastic job of differentiating between the carpet and stone floor that I have. I've tried to find damp spots on my rugs after it's run its course, and so far the rug stays perfectly dry. This is the first time that I've tried such a robot vacuum with an auto-retracting mop, and it's as good as I was hoping it was going to be, and in my opinion, it's an absolute game changer for the whole house cleaning scenario. And actually, the whole detection system is exemplary. I mentioned in my review of the K10 vacuum cleaner by Switchbot, currently the smallest robot vacuum cleaner you can buy, as far as I'm aware, but the software and detection is fantastic from Switchbot, with accurate movement and methodical cleaning, along with great AI that can accurately detect and avoid hitting anything if you choose to have that setting on. Honestly, for a brand that have only really just started getting into the full swing of robot cleaners, I was genuinely surprised to find that they have one of the more advanced AI systems that you can find right now. But I digress. Going back to the mop, what's even more special about this roller is that as it mops the floor, it dispenses clean fluid onto the roller, whilst also squeegeeing the section of the roller that's just brushed against the floor, sucking the wastewater into a collection at the rear. This means that you're always buffing your floor with a much cleaner mop head than any other design of robot mop that I've tried so far. And to inspect it, you just slide the cartridge out from the side of the device, which again is another very clever bit of design. Although the design, as brilliant as it is, does have a couple of small downsides, and the first being apparent on my floors that undulate a lot in the height due to the natural contours of the stone. Now, because the mop is larger and completely flat, it struggles getting into some of the very deep ridges and rivets and undulations in that floor, certainly more than robot cleaners with smaller flat pads. Of course, this is a problem caused by my circumstance, and people with flat floors, which is most people, it's going to perform a lot better. Now, if Switchbot are watching, I've actually thought of a design that could improve this for future iterations. If my mop was split into, say, 5 segments like the keys of a piano, allowing it to sort of contour to the shape of the floor. Technically, I have no idea how that's even possible. I'll let your engineering team figure that out. I should probably trademark that idea. Anyway, there's also one other disadvantage to this design, and that's because the mop doesn't stretch to the extent of the actual robot and doesn't extend over the edge. Now, this means that you'll never be able to mop the edge of the room. There'll always be a very small blind spot of a couple of centimetres. This is perhaps the biggest downside in this design, and although you might not notice it straight away, after months of use you might eventually start noticing a distinct line of dirt built up around the edges of rooms if you never manually clean. Now, of course, the sweeper will push the dust away, but without being able to physically scrub those edges with a wet mop, it will eventually show. So there's obviously some big benefits and a couple of downsides to this new design, but moving on from this, what it does with the dirty water after cleaning is where things start to get quite special. Now, the robot will charge at its base station, which has a large receptacle on top of it, which houses the dust and dirt bag, which is where this will empty all of the stuff that it vacuums and picks up. But what about the water? Well, the water station is actually separate to the dust collection station and main charger. So I have that set up in the kitchen. And it's like this for one very good reason. Now, the way I'm using this station is by using the additional tanks that you can get for it, which allows you to fill up with clean water in one tank and leave the other tank for dirty water for it to empty into. So when the wastewater reservoir on the robot is full, it'll go and expel it directly into that tank. But the reason it's separate is because you don't actually have to use these tanks. These are just an optional extra. If you didn't want to use the tanks, these just lift off the base station, leaving just the bottom section of the water station, which you can plumb directly into your mains water supply. So with this, you could put it underneath your kitchen units and forget about it. The S10 will go up to it and regurgitate its wastewater straight down the drain like some sort of mother bird and fill its reservoir from the tap. And what's really cool is that the robot actually powers the station, so you don't need to be anywhere near a power source with the water station. I love this, and it just takes away a huge part of the regular maintenance of robot mops that require filling and emptying of the base stations and tanks. It's one step closer to the complete self-sufficient robot cleaning experience that I've been crying for years. I know right now that I'm using the tanks instead of plumbing in, so I still have that laborious tank changing and emptying scenario, but that's because I'm moving house in the next month and I wasn't about to rip open my kitchen just to plumb it in. I'll save that for the new house. But it is worth mentioning that with this no intervention mopping, it's only applicable if you're happy to use just water to mop with. If you want to use a harsher solution, you'll still have to manually fill up the reservoir on the filling station, which the robot will then mix with the water from the tap. Switchbots sell their own cleaning solution to go in here, which they heavily imply that you must use. But me being a naughty boy, so far I've been putting a diluted mixture of Sif cleaning solution in the water tank, which seems to have worked perfectly fine so far. Whether or not you could put undiluted Sif into the base station, I won't know until I've plumbed it in. So if anyone else has done this, do let us know in the comments. If not, I might do a 6 month later at some point. But, of course, using the non-Switchbot cleaning solution may have some long-term negative effects. Perhaps the chemicals are harsher than the Switchbot formulation. But there's one thing for sure. If you're going to be a naughty boy or girl and do what I did and use other cleaning solutions to save yourself a penny or two, make sure it's a non-foaming solution, because you might quickly regret that if you do. Oh, and also the reservoir cap has a slightly unusual design. They've decided to use what feels like sandpaper on the inside of the actual latch, which makes it a particularly unpleasurable experience trying to open it. Anyway, even though you do have to top up the cleaning solution when it's plumbed in, it's still a lot less maintenance than before, like I said. It's just unfortunate that you still have to manually empty the dust collection station. Of course, this won't be very often, given that it's got a 4-litre capacity, but another idea here for Switchbot, if you're watching this, is to perhaps sell a bin, a regular kitchen bin, that has a powered S10 collection suction vacuum thing to empty it into a regular bin, into your bin liners. So you can empty the dust that this collects with your normal rubbish. Should probably patent that as well. The first STU'S reviews robot. Actually, with that said, the base station does have another killer feature I've yet to mention, and that's the fact it has a mop dryer on the lowest section of it. This puts heated air over the mop to dry it, which in turn helps it last longer and also eliminates that damp smell that mops often end up with. Now, another fantastic design, but there is one consideration here, and that's that it's quite noisy, and it seems to run forever after mopping. Not sure on the actual time that it takes, but it's got to be over 6 hours. So if you've got this somewhere near where perhaps you're sitting and want to be quiet, like a living room or even in a bedroom, don't run it during the second half of the day, because you'll be sitting there or in your bed trying to get some peace and quiet whilst the heater is just whirring away drying that mop. Slight inconvenience, but I guess it's a necessary one, unfortunately, to clean and eliminate bacteria and smells. Now, I mentioned at the start that the S10 has utility beyond just cleaning, and this is kind of what's inspired my bin idea. And if what I've said about the mopping system hasn't been magical enough, it's now about to graduate from Hogwarts with the next 2 tricks, because Switchbot actually sell 2 further stations that this can dock in: a humidifier and a dehumidifier. And this is really clever, because this robot can fill itself using the water from the dehumidifier that it takes from the ambient environment, and use that water to clean floors, essentially saving money on your water bill. Admittedly, it'll be only a few pennies, but pennies you can spend on a pint of beer instead of giving it to the money-grabbing suits. But it can also take the water from your base station or tap if it's plumbed in and automatically fill up the Switchbot humidifier if it's running low on water. I think this is an incredible innovation, and it really does make this a much more versatile house assistant instead of just a robot cleaner. There is one slight downside or consideration to this though. If you're using a cleaning solution, whether that's in the reservoir whilst plumbed in or doing what I do with cleaning solution in the tank, you can no longer use the robot to fill up the humidifier. Otherwise, it would be humidifying your room with a gas that would probably be considered a war crime. Although, saying that, I don't think it says anywhere on my SIF bottle not to use it in a humidifier. But still, I wouldn't advise it. Now let's talk about the price, because these new innovations indeed come with a cost. The base model of the S10 comes to £999 or £899 when I checked whilst writing this episode, as there was a discount code for £100 off. And if you needed, you can get the external water tanks if you don't have the ability to plumb it in for £79 on top of that. Now I actually think, comparatively, this is an excellent launch price. A lot of other robot cleaners I've tested that have not even half the innovations that this has often come at a similar price or even higher. Take the Ecovacs Omni X1 for example, which was something like £1,500 at launch, which was crazy. So at $899 or around £1,000 with the added tanks, I think that's a really reasonable cost to launch at. Don't get me wrong, $899 is still a hell of a lot of money for a robot cleaner. I can't shy away from that, but for a device that requires significantly less amount of intervention, with its auto-filling and emptying directly into your plumbing, like I said earlier, we're one step closer to a fully self-sufficient cleaning robot, and at that price I'm more than happy to pay, especially if I never have to manually clean my floors again. So to summarise on this episode and to kind of recap some of the points, for it's been a particularly lengthy episode on this device, the S10 is an incredible device full of innovation, and for me is very nearly a perfect product. There are some things I want to see improved in the future, in a future iteration. I want a wider mop that doesn't miss out the edges, and I'd like dual front brushes for a more optimal clean, and I'd also like a slightly faster and quieter mop drying system. But apart from those things, the new innovations have blown me away. I love the low intervention nature of this device, and I've had to fiddle around with it a lot less than any other robot cleaner I've had before. So this is a massive step in the right direction of robot vacuum cleaners, and the only step I really wanted. It's all very well and good adding obstacle avoidance and advanced maps detection and new mopping pads and etc, but if you still have to fiddle around with it every few days trying to make it work, like emptying things or untangling things, then what's the point? Switchbot here have gone a long way to solve the only problem I want to see solved in a robot vacuum cleaner. I don't want to be involved in the cleaning of the house. I just want a robot to do it all for me and do it well. And in my opinion, the S10 is the closest to that dream that I've had so far. What do you think of the S10 and its new innovations? Do you think that it's very close to replacing the need to manually clean your floors, or are we still a long way off this future? And the price, do you think at just shy of £1,000 it makes this unobtainable for the most people, or do you see value in that price? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's all have a good chinwag about it. And if you enjoyed today's episode and find it helpful to decide whether or not the S10 is for you or not, then make sure you return the favour and hit that thumbs up and subscribe button, and I'll see you back for another episode of STU'S Reviews soon. You're going back in the house. You need to go and clean the floors.